So what we want to do is just to give you a little bit of background to our, and actually the intro is pretty much done in the first part of my presentation anyway. Really share with you some of the experiences of actually working with a couple of the big players within the UK, look at some of the current challenges which the industry is facing, but also look at some of the opportunities which we've got and where can growers and suppliers go for help. Just want to emphasise, these are my comments, so they don't reflect the views of Mac or with G's or any of my current clients, so please don't shoot me if you don't like what you hear. And if you're quite of a delicate disposition, I forgive, cover your eyes, or if you don't get too upset with what you might see. So just really going back a little bit on my history, I've actually got a PhD in insect pathology at what was GCRI, little beastie on the right-hand side is a vine weevil, so it'd be very familiar to ornamental growers. I then moved on to HDC, so I spent a period with HDC looking after the research program, and the reason why I got a dog on a surfboard is HDC at that point was very much one man's dog outfit. The AHDB now is a much bigger, more serious operation than we were. We actually had salubrious offices above a chip shop. So that was where we had very humble beginnings. From that humble beginnings of a chip shop, moved into a Fresca business, and that's the big site at Transfeser in Paddock Wood. So it's a £500 million turnover business now supplying fruit and veg from around the world. I then went through a period of consultancy and then got sort of sucked into the G's business. And as was mentioned, we started a footprints of food, carbon footprint business as well. And for those of you who don't actually know G's, G's is a bit of a monster of the produce business. So the products on the oil tanker basically are where sort of G's is very much driving market share in the business within the UK. And then more recently, I've just set up the Agri-food solutions business, and I'm happy to discuss opportunities with anybody here today, and that's the end of the advert for me. So let's get on to the proper talk. Just so a bit helpful, actually, what makes a great produce business? And the people here, who some of you will know, is on your left-hand side is Chris Mack, who's effectively the family which owns the Fresca business. On the right is John Shropshire, the family that owns the G's business. So these are two individual families that actually have built very big businesses. And what they actually are is the family business. They're really long-standing businesses, now in second and third, or actually fourth generation businesses. They've got long-term vision. So they're not in it for a quick buck, they're not in it for today, they're actually in it for the future. And they actually understand about relationships with suppliers and relationships with customers. So they're very much looking up and down the supply chain. They've got very strong values, so they're very clear about where they're going. And they basically got a really clear focus on produce. What they're not, they don't want to go buy big yachts. They don't want to go and invest in racehorses. They don't want to go and buy a football club. These are produce people through and through, which actually makes them quite special, because some people within the industry get a bit diverted and say, okay, I want to go and have a new little hobby, and they start playing money into other things. Neither of those people are interested in that. They actually believe in what they're trying to do as a business. And effectively, in terms of sort of the G's model, just to pick a few examples from my history, what G's is about is a completely vertically integrated business. So the G's business actually controls everything through from seed to retail shelf. There's no one else within that chain. Historically, there have been all sorts of other partners within that chain. They've all gone now because of the vertical integration delivers a huge benefit for supply. G's hasn't got involved in seed breeding as yet, so the seed industry is safe for the moment, but no doubt at some stage we might try that one as well. But obviously looking at our customers, we've got some interesting customers which we serve across the high street, and the customers are changing, and obviously they're getting quite refined and evolved. Some of our customers which G's actually serves and other people serve, actually, there's a question of actually how far to the right they are within that graph. And obviously that needs updating because you can't use this plastic bag anymore. Now they've got a 5p charge on it. But in terms of where we look at customers, as mentioned this morning, customers are changing. They're changing a lot. And a lot of the customers now, they can't even see farming. They've got no idea what farming is. Farming's about what the media tells them it is. So, if you're top of one of those tower blocks in London, you might actually get a sight of something green in the distance, and that's as near as you come from it. So what they get is a Waitrose shelf or an Amazon delivery. It's something which is pristine, it's clean, it's all neatly packaged. They've got no concept whatsoever where it comes from. The effort of actually trying to get that together, actually in that format, is huge. They don't understand it, and frankly, they're not actually that interested or worried about it. So as suppliers, we look at it from we can worry all about that lot, but the consumer's not that bothered. You know, what the consumer wants is consistency. So what we're trying to do is actually to really connect and understand what they're trying to do. I just put this up because it's quite interesting that, you know, people eat and drink lots of things. But if you ask people about, okay, when you buy a loaf of bread, how connected are you with a loaf of bread? I'm not really. So look at the arable growers in this country. Are they connected with the consumer? No, because basically there is no direct linkage. You come to our end with fresh produce, they are absolutely connected. The media loves fresh produce. It's constantly going on about it. So in terms of the connection, quality standards, production standards, we sit absolutely on the right-hand side as far as produce is concerned. If you actually look at the environmental impact, produce gets a lot of flack about environmental impact. But in terms of the area which actually covers within the world farming business, it's tiny compared to the arable sector. So there's a slight irony behind there. But nonetheless, that's the world in which we live. Geez and Mac do a lot of work on category management. And the point which I want to make on category management is massive amount of data, getting more and more data around. But it's actually pretty key that you use your data to understand what it's telling you. And it's quite easy to actually look at something, to misinterpret it and get completely the wrong idea. So if you look at about what do customers actually really want, we have some very diverse views from the straight-on market stores, I want it as cheap as possible, I can get it, to the guys in Fortnum & Mason whose price is just completely irrelevant. Basically, requirements change with time, so we go through recession, everybody goes to have a different set of requirements, we go into better economic conditions, people change. So as a supply business, you've got to keep on changing, you've got to keep on reinventing yourself. A supplier who sits still is a dead supplier. And, you know, as I say, urban consumers don't really understand farming. I've got one thing which I call the Daily Mail effect. You know, the press loves stories. So they love produce stories because it brings, you know, it connects up with customers. So a lot of the challenges which we face are fueled by Daily Mail prejudice. They're not based on any good scientific facts or anything. And it creates an enormous amount of concern. It then fuels it through the Twitter sphere and all that IT stuff that people talk about, and creates an enormous amount of problems for the industry. And what we also find is lots of inconsistency between opinions and purchasing behaviour. So when you talk to people, say, oh, what are all these different things? When you actually look at what they actually do, not the elite 5% who actually stay quite close to their opinions, the 95% who don't, there's a big difference in language and commentary and actual behaviour. And this is the sort of problem you get, that, you know, you believe they're after the environment, they care about the environment, but the reality, they're actually all busy shopping in Aldi and Lidl. And the environment's actually not so important to them. And as farmers, we're facing a lot of business, basically a lot of change, a lot of pressures. And I think everybody in the world is now facing some really serious issues. And I don't think people are really grasping with it in terms of energy supply, water supply, and food supply. And just to remind you, look at where population is going. You know, we're heading up to 9 billion people. And I quite like this quote because effectively, once you've got air and once you've got water, the next thing you actually need is food. You know, you can have as many iPhones as you want, but if you've got no food, your iPhones are pretty well useless. And, you know, if people start to struggle with food, which they will do if we don't sort this actually feeding 9 billion out, we're going to have some serious issues as a planet. So one of the things which we're doing, which Jesus has done very heavily, is focus quite much on sustainability to try and create cycling systems. So this is just an example of what the business has created. On the left-hand side is basically a brand new mushroom unit, which I'll talk about in a moment. On the right-hand side is an AD unit. So the farm is growing maize to go into the AD. We take the heat out of the AD, it goes in the mushroom farm. We take the digestate out of the AD, that goes onto the land for fertiliser. We take electricity out of the AD, that goes onto the mushroom farm. So that's a whole cycling system actually really designed to give us a very high level of efficiency and sustainability within that operation. So why are fresh produce growers different? Well, you know, clearly there's a small number of very specialist people. They're dealing with high-value crops. They're doing some very, very clever equipment. And they've got a lot of exposure to market demand, and really in the most severe exposure to fast-moving consumer goods environment. And they're working in global supply chains. But just to give you a bit of a flavour of some of the challenges which you face as a business, you know, Geez as a business is actually selling 225 million iceberg lettuce a year. If you think about it, at the moment, each one of those is cut by hand. That's one person cutting one of those. They're making decisions very, very quickly. They're harvesting 364 days a year. So Jesus is very generous. It gives them Christmas Day off. But every other day they work. And effectively they've got seconds to make a decision about what to do with that product. And what we've actually found, the sort of mantra within the business is, variability equals inefficiency equals waste. So a lot of the effort within the G's business goes in actually nailing variability and taking it out of the system. So that's basically what we're looking for is, the reason why they're all dead straight, the whole lot's all GPS controlled. So every plant in that system is all being controlled where it goes. There's no messing around with it because every plant will all be harvested on exactly the same day. If it's a day early, a day late, that plant's gone. So we've got to get that exactly right. They put a lot of investment into technology. So this is a machine. This is basically a field version of the sort of things that Val Fresco would have. Of actually just basically is taking the crop off, the baby leaf crop off that situation, put it straight into crates and away to a processor. We hear a lot about food waste within the UK, and it's a very trendy thing to go on about food waste. The EU is wicked because it actually doesn't like bendy bananas. Let's all go and sell bendy cucumbers. And retailers get on this, they see the opportunity. I personally think that the industry's actually got very good at actually taking food waste out, actually getting very consistent products. So I'm actually not a great fan of actually selling ugly fruits because I think it's actually, if you do the proper end-to-end analysis on it, it doesn't make sense. Consumers actually, the bulk of consumers don't actually want it. If you ever try to put a bendy cucumber in your fridge, you'll realise it's actually a real big pain. If you actually try to pack them in the box, they don't fit on the shelf. Watch a consumer going through a shelf, they go through, they route around, it gets broken, it gets damaged. You actually create more wastage, but actually, go back to the Daily Mail effect, doesn't make such a good story. The best story is actually the EU is preventing us from selling these things. The reality is actually, I believe, the consumer doesn't actually want them. So just, looking at the waste situation, we are constantly accounting for waste, but that's because waste is expensive. If we as a business have paid for something, we either want to get a value for it or we don't want to pay for it in the first place. Other things which we face which are a little bit unique, we have fairly big food safety issues. Within the G's business, it's actually on fresh salads, so everything which actually harvests goes in the bag, it's one wash and you're eating it. So if a business gets it wrong, we've got some fairly major problems. And the USA in particular has quite a good ability to get things horribly wrong. So a lot of the problems which come out of the USA are actually partly down to sort of some very poor management practices in farming. They don't quite get it. I think the UK, with our closer relationship with our customers, actually probably in a much stronger position on that. I think we've got some really big issues on soils. Globally, we've underinvested in our soils, and we've got some big problems. The tractor on the right-hand side, that's basically a piece of G's planting machine. It's purpose-built. The whole lot, it's just built in-house. The reason why it's actually on those big tracks is it's purpose-built, so it can actually just run across that soil. You can have a couple of 3 centimetres of rain on that soil. We can be back on that soil within a couple of hours because the machine is designed to work in a very delicate way. Looking at peat, obviously G's produce a lot of plants for planting out, and so we're using them in blocking compost. We're also using a lot of peat actually in casing for the mushrooms. But we're exploring opportunities to actually try and take the peat down, try and take the volumes down. But there are limitations. Everything we looked at in terms of non-peat usage, certainly in the blocking situation, we haven't found anything which works successfully. We have a big problem with climate change. So actually within the same season, we'll actually get drought conditions and terrible conditions actually within the same season. But we've got to deal with that. We can sit and moan about it as much as you like, and okay, it might be wonderful to go and put up some nice Val Fresco greenhouses. At the moment, we haven't got that luxurious position, so we are living with the elements. What does this actually mean to us? Well, this is an example of a planting program. We're planting every single day through the summertime, and that's all tailored up to actually give us production on every single day. If you get that sort of event where you miss some planting times or planting windows, what you get is you get a gap in your program. At the end of the day, what that then creates in week 22, we've got a supply problem. If I've got to bring the previous crop, hold it back a bit, bring the new crop forward to try and mesh it together. If we don't succeed in meshing that together, that has to be flown in from the States. because that's the only option which a business has. There isn't spare capacity. The spare capacity which we all thrived on 20 years ago is gone because the industry has actually been very, very efficient. So we haven't got built-in capacity, but yet the consumer in the marketplace just expects constant availability. For them, it's a factory. I go to the store, I'll ring up Amazon.com, and I just get my product. I don't want to get from you a note which says, actually, terribly sorry, can you come back next week because it's not available? And just basically, you know, Mother Nature can be very cruel at us, so, you know, we have to try and keep these crops growing. So it's not just when you're growing salad crops. If you're growing tomato crops, you've got to pick them all the time. If you're growing strawberry crops, you've got to pick them all the time. You can't just go away on holiday for a week and say, okay, I'll come back, because these are continual cropping situations. Water is another massive problem. You know, we're a wet island, and yet water is quite a threat to us. There's parts of the world where they're facing real meltdown situations. So this is an example of a 500,000 cubic metre reservoir which Jesus built in Cambridgeshire. One of the problems which we've got is actually John Shropshire has now created the most expensive duck ponds in East Anglia, because since making these investments we haven't really touched very much of the water in there. And ironically, this reservoir now is so rich in biodiversity, we're worried we can't actually use it when we need to, because the EA will try to protect the biodiversity within the reservoir, which was never there, which we've now created. So it's just part of the growing challenge which you face. An example of some mechanisation. So we've now taken, this is an auto-wrapper rig, which has actually taken iceberg lettuce. Actually, it's basically the bagging process where you take a lettuce, you put it in a plastic bag. That's now gone because the machine does it for you. That takes 4 people out of that operation. We're constantly looking for new products and new innovations and developments. And we're having to live within the environment. So the UK is obviously a very valuable environmental system. We have to live within that environment. So we're basically trying to run a very intensive farming system amidst a well-protected biodiversity zone around it. Crop protection is something which causes an immense amount of worry. So that actual fact, believe it or not, is the crop of iceberg surrounded by weeds. I think it would be much more profitable if we actually harvested the weeds and left the iceberg behind. As Claire has mentioned, some of the pest and disease problems we've got as an industry, we're losing products, we've got problems with resistance management, and it's presenting some farming problems as well. And we're facing, again, a lot of media storm about crop protection, how wicked it is, pretty much driven by NGOs, fueled by the media. And I think a lot of the decisions are based on extreme risk, rather than everything is dangerous for you if you have it in the wrong volume, and pesticides are no different. But it is impacting upon key supply chains. So if you look at within the EU environment, one of the impacts of neonicotinoid bans is cabbage stem flea beetle is absolutely annihilating the rape crop. So the autumn rape crop is diminishing very, very significantly because farmers can't produce it efficiently with the absence of actually an effective insecticide. The impact of that is the rape yields will go down, so actually rapes become less efficient as a crop, and we'll have less of it. So these are real problems. We may well just end up importing vegetable oil from other parts of the world, potentially grown and managed with even less desirable products, but that's the impact of global trade. And for me, I find it's rather strange that you go to a doctor, you're quite happy to have any sort of chemical a doctor gives you because you believe it's good for you, but you don't actually like the use of pesticides because you don't really quite understand what they're all about. And we've also got quite a big audit burden as an industry, and everybody wants an audit. Everybody wants their own protocol. So we have a situation where they all come together and all agree with BRC, and now they all say, well, actually, I want my own variant on that, which adds quite a lot of burden to the farming business. If you want a really miserable life, try growing mushrooms, because these are probably the most difficult things. Those little beasties, they double in size every 24 hours. If you look at them, they go brown and bruise, and yet we're trying to actually do that and actually live in a very, very competitive price market. And then we've constantly, as an industry, we've just got new challenges all the time. So, we've got the European Union, and it's causing us a lot of concerns. Actually, what does it mean? How are we going to live with it? What's the changes going to be? Who knows what the future looks like? But as a business, because we're long term, we've got to think about it. In terms of sort of the overall concerns, there is a profitability issue without any shadow of a doubt. I think there's some quite issues on short-termism, and I'll explain that in a moment. I think some of the technologies which we'd like to have are actually being inhibited by anti-technology attitudes. So again, we're quite happy to have smartphones, we're happy to have all these electronic gizmos, but the minute it gets near to food, we don't like it. We seem to have an aversion to it. And for me, it's about, when we have policies driven by emotion rather than great science, we're in a dangerous place. So if you just look at sort of farming costs, and that's basically the picture from 94 to 2013, not surprisingly, every single one of those lines has gone up. The only line which hasn't actually gone up is the price of the final product, which is iceberg lettuce, which has actually gone down from 25p to just shy of 19p a head. Now, we've obviously got to live with that, and the only reason we survive by changing our practice. We change our business model to actually try and survive within the model. If you don't change anything, you go bankrupt, because you can't live with that situation. And for me, it's about future vision. So if you look at the consumer's just interested in their next week. I'm very generalising, not everybody, but the bulk of a lot of consumers are. If you go to a politician, they've only got a 5-year time frame. So all they're worried about is actually, do I get to my next election? What happens in 10 years, 20 years? I really don't give a damn. It's not my problem. I'm just worried about 5 years. For a farmer, farmer's about generations. So a good farmer is actually worrying about what he gives to his next generation. That's what makes a Shropshire family, for example, a very strong farming family, because they're investing for the next generation. They're not doing it for tomorrow. One of the challenges which we have is the consumers are next week. A lot of our retail customers also behave next week. So if you give me a great deal this week, I'm happy as Larry. If you want to have a price rise next week, I'll find someone else to give me a great deal next week. I don't want to commit to anybody if I think I've got something better. And it's quite difficult where farming wants commitment and the retail machine doesn't want to give commitment. It's actually quite a problem. And what the retail is doing is, the cake is actually changing in size. Successful retailers are basically just trying to grab a bigger and bigger share of the cake. And that's how they're going for their survival. So what is the industry doing? Well, clearly within the retail space, there's some pretty big beasts out there. I was going to label the elephants with Asda, Tesco's, Sainsbury's, but I thought I might be a bit provocative. But the reality is actually when those big beasts start moving around and start fighting, guess who? It's actually the supply chain that gets trampled because they don't want to push the cost onto the consumer. It's not a good place to be. Look at Unilever. Look at the aggravation between Tesco's and Unilever. It's all, very much hyping up. We're looking after the consumer. We're going to drive those costs into the supply chain. Eventually, the supply chains will go bankrupt. But they're not so concerned. Providing someone can supply, that's fine. The lady on the right-hand side, if you don't know, is Kristen Tacon. She's in there trying to actually protect some of the interests of the supply base. She's had some good effect. She's raised awareness. I've just really covered that one already. So what's business doing about this? Well, what business is doing is we're basically changing models. So in some situations, businesses have got bigger by actually finding relationships, like the two elephants, and actually getting together, having a little bit of schmooze, and then making a bigger business. It's not always worked, though. There's examples where businesses have been very successful. So if we use the G's example with a merger with Bomford's, with a merger with Langmead Farms, very, very good business ventures. But others, people have gone bankrupt. They've gone down different alleyways. So some of the Produce World experience where they've started to get involved in all sorts of areas where they don't have experience, and they've really come a cropper big time. But others have gone for incremental growth to actually try and grow market share and opportunity. But so within the fresh produce market, there are winners and losers. Big people get bigger, they get more aggressive, they learn to fight more effectively like your lion. But there are opportunities for everybody. This is not only a big people's place. They can find niches and opportunities for everybody to survive. You just got to know where your opportunity is and actually identify that and stick to what you're good at. So in terms of sort of what G's has done and what other people have done in terms of opportunities, taking cost out, we've got these field rigs. Each one of those costs something in the order of about £300,000 to build. If that runs for a 12-hour day, we're spreading that cost over 12 hours. If we run it for 24 hours a day, which we can do, we can actually then effectively half basically the overhead cost of that particular operation. We're looking to really to increase efficiency, so look at operations. How do you make operations more efficient? How do you make machines bigger? You know, this is our new tire delivery system, which we're working on. It looks pretty good to me. Investing very, very heavily in robotics. You know, we're taking, this is actually technology that comes out of Holland for our plant raising site. You know, that site now is doing all our plants on 3 people. So it's a big operation, but it's all done through a robotic control. We're using a lot of work in terms of big data and actually trying to figure out actually how to use live data to actually run and manage your business. And there's a lot of opportunities in the world of remote sensing to actually sort of take measurements of all sorts of aspects of your business and actually make decisions on it. I think UK season, particularly now with the pound taking a bit of a hammering, I think you'll find a lot more interest now will come back into, can we make the UK season longer? Whether that's a transient trend, I don't know. But nonetheless, you know, we're back into a pro-UK market. Not because people feel good about the UK, because it's actually expensive importing, which is why they want UK supply. And this is an example of some new resource which has just gone into the AHDB site at Sutton Bridge, funded by the new Crop Health and Protection Agritech Centre, of actually increasing our storage capacity for research within the UK. So anybody that's thinking about doing some more storage research, we've got more capacity now to actually do that research. And then looking at disruptive strategies, you know, a few years ago, these folks were all sitting there thinking, yeah, very nice, we'll argue amongst ourselves of actually how big do Tesco's come, who's number 2 on the list, where do Waitrose and M&S sit. And then all of a sudden, these folks appeared and they said, oh, hell, what are we going to do now? So without any question, you know, the discounters have absolutely disrupted the UK marketplace, disrupted a lot of the behaviours which exist in there. And what we've got to do as an industry, as a supply industry, is keep surviving, keep changing, keep adapting, because things are going to keep changing for us. If you sit still, people who sit still get dead. So these are examples of what's been going on within the industry. So on the left-hand side is an aerial photograph of Planet Earth. Those who don't know about Planet Earth, that's a big new greenhouse venture. It's been going for a few years now down in Kent. It's co-funded by the Fresca business and a group of Dutch growers. You know, that's really revolutionised and upset the tomato and pepper and cucumber industry. They've done something new which UK growers couldn't do, so they couldn't put the capital in. They put big capital in there. On the right-hand side is the G's mushroom unit. Again, it's a 48-tunnel unit. First mushroom unit, purpose-built for about 15 years within the UK. It's revolutionary. It's market-leading. Capacity is there to double that unit. Now, clearly, putting that volume of production into the mushroom industry is disruptive to the existing mushroom industry. And then in the middle is an example from America, which is another G's venture, where G's has actually taken its beetroot technology and gone to the US market. The US market didn't have fresh beet. So it's gone into that market and said, right, we'll give the US market fresh beet. And it's actually taken over that market by storm because it's seen an opportunity and gone after it. But the thing's coming, so that's current. What's in the future? So, you know, we've already heard from Alex about some of the vertical growing, or sorry, apologies, 3D growing systems. You know, where's this going to? You know, the Vale Frescos is, you know, relatively small scale. But actually, there's some pretty big scale operations going in there. At the moment, there's some questions about the economics, but is this actually where the future's going to lie? And then we have Amazon Fresh. So potentially, if you think that discounters are being disruptive, what happens if Amazon Fresh get going within produce? Where does that actually leave us? Where does that leave our existing supply chain? If you know the answer, please tell me, so I can make a lot of money by selling the answer. I'm not sure we know, but the reality, we've actually got to be prepared for it. So, you know, as farmers, as growers, as part of the supply chain, can you survive? And I truly believe, of course you can survive. There's always opportunity if you know where to look and know how to get it. So, you know, so the guy on the left-hand side is a traditionalist. He's doing what he's always done. You know, his kit there costs £4.99 for a hoe and a few dog biscuits for the dog's food. That's what his operation costs. The piece of kit on the right-hand side costs something like £250,000 to buy. So I'm looking at £4.99, £250,000. I'll have a £4.99 job. But the reality is the £250,000 is a development system. It will get cheaper. The hoe's not going to get any cheaper because actually, unfortunately, unless you work really hard, you can only hoe a small amount of that crop. So ultimately, people who are progressive, people who invest in their business, people who actually embrace technology are the survivors. And the guys who want to be traditional, They might have a small piece in there. They might supply a little local market, do some bit nichey things, but they won't be a big player into the future. And this is where, you know, we're quite fortunate in the UK because we're getting a lot of support now from government. You know, I would happily criticise government a few years ago for being ignoring the industry. Now it's different. You know, we heard from Alex about actually where you're working with Innovate UK money, you actually make things happen. It de-risks projects. Things that growers would like to do, they can now do because Innovate is actually supporting that process. And there's plenty of different sources of money. If you know where to look for them, and you know, one of the problems is some are actually quite bureaucratic, so they're not for the faint-hearted. Having sent, you know, got to bed at 12:30 this morning because I had to get an Innovate UK robot bid in by midday today. So, you know, it is not easy, but nonetheless the opportunities are there. And then the circles on the left-hand side that's part of the government's agri-tech investment. They've now spent roughly nearly £100 million into new resources to support the agricultural industry. So the 4 different sites which they've sponsored are, there's a site which is Agrimetrics, which is the first one, is actually basically using big data. There's one Agri-Epi, which is all about farm engineering and actually engineering opportunities. The bottom one is CHAT, which is crop health and protection. And I'm doing some work with crop health and protection. So, you know, I'm really keen to talk to anybody in this audience who says, look, I'm quite keen about some crop protection issues, but I need a bit of help. What can we actually work together in a collaborative basis? Please talk to me because there's opportunities now within this space. And the final one, probably not a lot of interest within this audience, is SEAL, which is about basically livestock production. So in terms of sort of, you know, where you can go from help, you know, we're in this space and there's lots of idiots like me who put a hat on that says consultant, will come and consult on this and consult on that. But just to be aware that, you know, you're going to have some challenges in your world. And, you know, you're always looking for the greener grass on the other side of the fence, and it's not that easy. And then sometimes you get yourself in a bit of a problem. But you just need to be aware that not everybody comes along to your farm is going to be there to help you. So really just in summary that for growers within this industry, it is challenging. You know, we've got a very unstable environment, we've got a very unstable commercial conditions, but actually if you've got agility and adaptability, you're going to survive. You know, there are great survivors out there. You know, the industry is full of great survivors. I think that if you're looking at a strategy of actually sort of using little as often, but actually accepting as much as necessary. This is all not about going down to zero input farming. Zero input farming is crazy. It's not going to feed you 9 billion people. This is about actually efficient farming. For me, you know, research and innovation is absolutely key to dealing with issues. And also about partnerships. So what I've done a lot of within G's is I partnered up and down the supply chain. Because you can't, no matter how big you are, generally speaking, you can't do it all together, all by yourself. You need to find partners who share a problem and actually can work with you. So hopefully that's been a bit of a helpful insight into the world of G's, and I'm happy to take any reasonable questions.